with such enthusiasm today that we get to talk about the Only What We Can Carry project of Educulture. It's a project that includes the delegation to Manzanar, which is bringing educators as well as community members along with survivors of World War II exclusion down to Manzanar. And we're so honored that the wonderful, wonderful ranger that welcomes us and rolls out the red carpet for us is on today to listen to the program and be here with us, Alisa Lynch. And we have the founder and co-director of the program, Jon Garfunkel. We have Bill Covert, who was on the first delegation down, wonderful teacher. And we have Lilly Kitamoto, dear friend, and of course, survivor that has been in the news a lot lately. So we're especially glad that you're here today, Lilly. So I think I'll start it off by just going ahead and asking, could you briefly introduce yourselves and how, unless somebody wants to go first, I'll just ask Jonathan.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here and to be in all of your company and see so many familiar faces and recognize that as we talk about this project, it's involved so many people and many of you are here with us today, so that's very exciting. My name's Jon Garfunkel, and I am the founder and managing director of Educulture and the Only What We Can Carry project. And Katy did not mention the fact that she's co-director of the Only What We Can Carry project, so I want to make sure, give a shout out to that.
Thanks.
Yeah, we'll be here with you all.
Bill?
Thank you. I am very excited about this as well. I'm Bill Covert, recently retired fourth grade teacher up at Wilkes, and that's a project. The project like this was particularly poignant because it's fourth grade. You study Washington State history, and we really chose to kind of zero in on Bainbridge Island history. And what a wonderful, authentic way for them to learn about history than hearing about it from the survivors themselves. So,
Not to mention a wonderful board member on the Bainbridge Island Historical Museum board. And Lilly?
I'm Lilly Kitamoto Kodama, and I was fortunate to be on the first delegation to Manzanar with the Only What We Can Carry project. And it was a wonderful experience. And I continued to go on several trips after that. And I feel like I was one of the lucky people who was able to do that.
Thanks.
And I am a survivor.
Thank you. Such an honor. I wonder if I could start with maybe Bill. What was your purpose for wanting to get involved with the Manzanar delegation?
well, again, fourth grade, we really focus on that Bainbridge Island history piece. And at about this time period, we've been married. Madison and I had a project going that was an oral history project. And one of the things that I learned through that oral history project is that when you bring people in and they tell their stories, the kids really latch on to aspects of those stories. And it really gives you, it just really makes the understanding of the time, it gives it a much deeper understanding of the time. And so there was that aspect of oral histories. I was looking for other ways to connect. And then really, I think the title of this was Authentic Learning. I think there's really no more authentic learning than hearing history from the people who have lived it. And those were two crucial pieces for me to really find a way to bring the history alive for the fourth graders. And I felt like the way to way that might come about. And, you know, entering into it, I knew the power of stories. I didn't know exactly where it was going to take us, but I really felt that if those fourth graders could get a hold of a few stories, it would really give them some appreciation for the challenges and the joys that people experienced during this particular event. Then that was going to be well worth the time, and it certainly was.
Reminds me, thank you, of one of my purposes of getting involved was I heard an excuse from teachers because they were so sensitive that they felt like they couldn't tell the stories because they were not Japanese American, you know, or they were not a teacher of color. And so they were really, it's, you know, imagining it from now till back then, you know, it was just really easier not to tell the story if you didn't have your own voice. And so that was one of the things that really excited me about hearing about it, was that, yes, the kids will hear the, you know, the stories, but they'll hear it in a voice that, since you were there, their teacher was there, then the authenticity can come from your heart.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's really great. Now, I'm wondering, Lilly, what purpose did you have for getting involved?
Well, I have to tell you that when I retired and moved to Bainbridge Island, my purpose was to lay low and not get involved with anything. That was, but my brother Frank did not allow that. And so I really was, because of him, and I felt that, and it turned out to be a fortunate thing, but it was because of him that I was able to go on. I feel I was able to go on this first trip to Manzanar. And well, since then, I've learned to really appreciate what my brother was doing. And I feel fortunate that I was able to become involved. And so all my plans for retirement went by the wayside, and I've been more busy as a retiree than when I was working full time.
Katie, can I try for a second?
Please.
You know, I just want to point out how in so many ways I recognized at the time, but didn't quite understand the full context of what in certain ways a risk and challenge this was to be asking people to take this trip, especially survivors. I had this vision and dream of doing these bearing witness trips because they were very part of my journey as an educator over a number of decades. And when I moved to the island, got to know Frank, and we had applied for funding that was available from the state of Washington. Every state, California, Oregon, and Washington, passed laws that set aside a certain amount of money that the legislatures allowed you know, schools to have access to in order to bring alive this subject. And we applied for a grant and got a grant to do this first trip. And I had talked to Frank, and Frank was very excited. But the notion of who should come and how, you know, how would we invite them and who would want to go back, you would think, to a place like this. Having spent some intensive time at the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp in Poland, you would think it would be the last place any survivor or something like that, those death camps would want to go to. And while our concentration camps in the United States were not death camps, they were still places of imprisonment. And you would wonder who would want to return 67 years later with a group of teachers to talk about what you would think would be a fairly traumatic experience. Frank had the absolute opposite perspective. And he encouraged me to just call people and say, would you like to join us? And the notion was to pair, we had picked two sets of teachers from Wilkes Elementary and from Breidablik Elementary in North Kitsap, who I had known already and were very excited. And Frank was very excited, but the notion of we wanted to have an equal number of elders and survivors to join the teachers. And so I understand what it must have been like for Lilly to have to be sort of nudged into this by Frank, and didn't know me from Adam, really, I think at the time. And then I said to him, well, who else do you think we should try to get along and go? And he said, well, I think that Kay Sakai Nakao might be interested. And at the time, I didn't realize she was 89 years old. And he said, why don't you just call her and see if she might be interested? And I cold called her and mentioned that Frank had suggested she might be interested. And within, I don't know, 10 or 15, 20 minutes of the conversation, she agreed. And I remember having to suspend my disbelief that someone of her age would be so willing to go with a group of strangers back to Manzanar for this educational trip. But I think you can see that what I think had a certain sense of, and what I really had to just sort of trust would happen, was the fact that we all went together over a 4-day period, traveling all together as a unit, leaving on the ferry together, going to the airport together, flying down together, getting in a rental car, going into Little Tokyo, Japantown in LA and visiting the National Museum, Japanese American National Museum, then driving for 3 or 4 hours out to Lone Pine. And then the next day waking up and meeting Alisa at the at Manzanar Historic Site. And then all of a sudden, things just changed, and you would think that it would be a primarily solemn occasion the entire time, but there was probably more laughing and more humor than there was sort of the solemnness of it. But I recognize that it was really a lot for each of these survivors, probably over a dozen, 15 in all, who joined us over the 5 trips, to be willing to do this. And I know Lisa can speak to what that's like for people to come back, but it just showed you how special and unique this community really was, and especially the Japanese American community, in willing to take time at a period when they should be retiring and enjoying and just sitting back and doing nothing, to actually step out and travel very intensively, going from where we live to 3,000 feet above sea level, all the changes, and have to recall all these experiences from their youth or early adulthood. And I just could still to this day, am just so honored, tremendously honored, that they'd be willing to take that trip with us. And to see how it all paid off in terms of the experience the teachers had and the connection and being together so intensively over those 4 days. These are experiences I'll never forget.
Oh, but I feel that you should be honored for even thinking about making such a trip. And I have to say that as a survivor, it made my telling more authentic too, even just as it did for the teachers, because I then saw more as an adult what I really didn't remember things, but I was remembering things as a child, and to actually see the environment that my parents and the older people had to cope with when I was saying it was fun and games. But yet it was an enjoyable trip because the people we traveled with were such great people.
I just want to piggyback on that, that I think from my perspective as a teacher, it was initially pretty threatening to be considered going on what I imagine was going to be quite an intimate experience for these people on maybe their first return back to the internment camps. But and again, John, I'm going to give you kudos there, because I think the preliminary work we did in getting to know one another and getting to understand the stories, and really in that process also digging very deep just in terms of the survivors recollecting some things, and this was all pre-trip. This would be in that month before we went on the trip. I think that really helped, not only to help me lessen any feeling that might be threatening, but also just to give me a background to perhaps prepare me for what we're about to take on too. So I really think the preliminary work was well worth it, and that's where I really felt like I really forged a connection with Lilly, Frank, and Kay, and Mary certainly too. And those paid off immensely when you get down there and you could you could not only recall some of the things that they, or not only see in person some of those things that they had spoken about, but also then hear their reactions to the place while being at the place too, which was pretty amazing.
Alisa.
I was just going to say, so I've been at Manzanar 20 years, and we get, these recent years, we've gotten 110, 115, last year, 117,000 visitors. I first started working with Bainbridge folks like in 2003 on the memorial, and got to know Frank and Clarence first, and Kay, of course. But even though we have, we've had probably 1.5 million visitors over the years since 2004 that the visitor center's been open, Bainbridge has a big piece of my heart. And I know that that's true of some of my colleagues also. And I've been accused of putting too much percentage of Bainbridge in compared to what their percentage was in camp. But when you go in the Block 14 exhibits, Kay's voice is featured in there. Fumi Hayashida, Hisamatsu Daira, Matsu, definitely more than their percentage of camp, but I just want to express my gratitude for these trips. Some people I was already close to, I got to know other people like Frances, and the 7-Ups and other folks. And I think oftentimes, when we're living these experiences, we don't always think about how important they're going to become. As I was watching the movie, I was torn between gratitude for it having happened, but also, it's just so meaningful to see people who are no longer here, but they're still able to speak. So big congratulations to the survivors and to Jon and Katy for making this happen. And anytime you want to come back.
Well, I don't want to turn this into a love fest. I'm sure it's already there. It already has. The other thing I think that was so remarkable, and it happened every single time, and I'm sure it happens anytime anybody shows up, but it certainly happened to the Bainbridge Island elders and survivors that were with us, is to see a National Park Service institution like the Manzanar Historic Site and its incredible staff literally roll out the red carpet for these people. Treat them, I don't know if this is apropos, but it almost felt like they were being treated like royalty. And to think about the context in which this relationship, this exchange was happening, was in a former concentration camp. And to see how welcoming and supportive and caring and tender Alisa and all the staff are to any survivor who shows up, but in particular, the way that they embraced the Bainbridge Island community when we showed up made all the difference in how we were able to bear witness. And I know that it meant a lot to everybody. There's a lot of gratitude that goes around. This happened as a result of multi-faceted partnerships on a lot of levels, and the National Park Service, the Manzanar Historic Site certainly, lived up to its role as a partner in this. And I just, could not express any more gratitude for how much, what they've done down there, as well as how they welcome survivors back and make them feel so included and honoring their stories. And it was very powerful, very powerful. I mean, anyone who hasn't been down there, I really encourage you taking the time to make a pilgrimage. It's certainly worth it.
I know that was one of my, that's what I was astounded with, how much they had accomplished at the Manzanar, because I was working, part of the task force, working on the Minidoka Historic Site, and it had nothing there. And here was Manzanar with this huge interpretive center that had wonderful exhibits, and it was inspiring. And I think Alisa had a lot to do with what went in there, and it really is spectacular. But one of the things that I think was really graphic was when you first approached the entrance, there's a pickup truck that's all battered and beaten up, and its damage is the result of the sandstorm and the sand hitting it. And that really brought home graphically to me how strong the sandstorms were. And I used to say dust storms, and that made me change my stories to say sandstorms to show how painful the sand was when the storm came, and the graphic picture of the pickup truck and its damage illustrates that. And I thought that was pretty spectacular.
We just had one of those sandstorms Monday with winds up to 78 miles per hour. And 3 of my colleagues had windows literally blown out of their cars. Trees fell over everywhere in Independence. It ripped the roof off the airplane hangar. And we were fortunate. My husband and I did snap one of his trees in half, but to think, I was stressed out about it being inside our house, our insulated house. And to try to imagine what it must have been like to be inside of a barracks with, cracks in the floors and the walls. It was apocalyptic. I can send you all a video later of a short time lapse, and it was, it was incredible. So I don't know how you all and your parents did it, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Lilly, for sharing that example of a highlight of one of your visits. I was wanting to just check in and see if either Frances or Bill, do you have a highlight of one of your visits that you can tell us a little story about?
Well, I was mostly impressed with the people that accompanied me on the trips, because the teachers were wonderful. And just like Lilly said, I think I was learning more of what our parents had to go through, because being only 5, you did not experience probably the hardships that they went through, and to see it and to realize, for instance, the bathroom conditions and the rooms that we had was really something I never even feared or thought about. So that was, it was very educational to me. And like I said, I was impressed with you and Jon and all the people, the survivors that went with me. That was a real meaningful experience. And Alisa, of course.
Thanks, Frances.
Katie, if I can interrupt for a second, if it's
Yes.
okay with you, I had put together a little slideshow that had some images of the trips. And
Sure.
would this be a good time to loop it and play it behind people sharing stories?
Yeah. And I'm also going to suggest that we're going to stay on probably till 12:45, since we had some technical glitches and such. So if all of you need to be somewhere at 12:30, we understand. But if you can stay with us, that would be great. Go ahead, Jon.
So I'm going to just loop this slideshow. It includes images from all of our 5 delegations, along with a lot of the island-based educational programs we did. I see that Shannon Dowling is with us, and we had a chance to work with her when she was at the BPA, when Snow Falling on Cedars play was done, along with a lot of programs that were done throughout the island with students and teachers over the years. So this is just looping through, not in any particular order, but to give everyone a chance of some of what it was like there. And
Jon, that sign that you just showed, the Manzanar War Relocation Center sign, blew apart in the wind the other day. It literally snapped in half. So fortunately, that is a reproduction sign, but the posts and chains are original, and those survived. Yeah.
So I don't remember other people telling stories, but I just thought this might be nice to have in the background, Katie.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Bill, do you remember a story that you experienced yourself at Manzanar?
I actually, yes. There was one in particular we were standing at the kind of the doorstep to what was the beauty of that, the way it's laid out is you get maps, and we could identify exactly where their barracks were. And so we stood at the doorstep. I was standing there with Kay at the doorstep to her barracks, and you look out and there's those just spectacular Sierra Nevada mountains right there. And she looks at those and she's like, I had no idea that those mountains were there. And I to me, I was just, I mean, I was struck by the grandeur of the mountains, but perhaps even more struck by the fact that, and she was 22 at the time, that she would not have that that recollection. That was not the strong recollection of her time there. Certainly was the grandeur of the setting.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. That's amazing, and I've heard that definitely from many of their survivors too. Is just there actually are beautiful mountains here, but that's not at all what they remember, you know. And so, Jon, I'm going to pick on you. What's a moment that you remember that you can share with us?
I think looking at these pictures, when we talk about risk in return, we were completely honored to have 100-year-old Fumiko Hayashida join us on a delegation, and to bear witness with her and with Natalie, who was just in her arms and a baby at the time, and to see both of them navigate the sort of modern context in which, for example, the Japanese American National Museum, to all the various interpretive displays at Manzanar and other places that we went, and frame the story in essence 75 years later, was really, really powerful for me. And just to see her, the spirit, the incredible enduring spirit that Fumiko had, and getting to know her so well on this trip, and having this privilege of being able to walk with her as she revisited Manzanar, I think was certainly one of the highlights. I guess what I also just want to point out is we took 5 delegations, and each of them had a theme that was oriented towards a particular grade level. So we took elementary teachers on our first trip. We took the Sakai School administration and social studies teachers along with Kei Sakai Nakao and some of her family. On the second delegation, we took Mary Woodward and the staff and administration and librarian from the Woodward School on the third delegation. On the fourth delegation was when Fumiko Hayashida joined us, and we had a number of various survivors from different generations. And the fifth delegation was for the Bainbridge High School teachers. And we also happened to take Faith Chapel, who was a superintendent at the time, and we paired them with survivors who were of high school age when they were sent to concentration camp. And so the purpose was to, particularly with Bainbridge Island teachers, to make sure that every major grade level band, from elementary to Sakai Middle School to Woodward Middle School to the high school, all those teachers were offered an experience who were responsible at those various grade levels for teaching about this subject, to give them all a chance to come to Manzanar to bear witness with survivors and elders. So that was really an intention that we saw in some ways as an act of community service to the school district, because all of the expenses for these trips were completely covered. So no one spent anything who was invited along on the journey. All the expenses were covered. And the idea was that this would be some kind of invitation, inspiration to more deeply embed these stories within the Bainbridge Island School curriculum at respective grade levels.
Yeah, and I'd love to share the story too, that part of making sure everybody's whole trip was covered was because we didn't want people popping in and popping out. It's like the kind of confinement where you have to travel together, and then you have to, you know, get into these vans and drive for 4 hours and get to know each other, and then have to have meals together. You know, it was a way in which the program really did foster community and relationships that lasted way after all of the trips. And I think that was a profound part of the setting up of the trip. I was wondering if anybody in the audience had any questions for John or for Lilly or for Bill about their experience about the Only What We Can Carry project.
I could get out of stop share so we can see everybody.
Well, I just posed one, and that was, I was wondering if Bill might be able to talk about how this changed his experience of interacting with history with kids and how it changed their response to these stories, and if that's had a lasting effect on how we tell this story to our children on Bainbridge and the curriculum in Bainbridge schools today.
You're muted.
Yeah, there we go. To that last point, let me come back to that. That is certainly the challenge, is trying to help it become an enduring legacy. But I think I would point to one image I have, and actually it was in that slideshow that you just played there, of the survivors actually pointing to either their picture in the photo or their name on the wall, because after we have introduced the story to kids, actually John has really helped a great deal in helping me bring survivors into the classroom also. So we've gotten to know Lilly, we've gotten to know Kay in the classroom itself. And there was one time when we went to the memorial, well, more than, we've been there almost yearly, but we went to the memorial, and as we got out of the cars and we're going down to the signage there's the photo of the survivors going down the dock, and one kid runs up and says, "Oh, there's Lilly," and can point to Lilly right there on the sign. And I think that tells a lot of things, honestly. I think it shows you that connection that the kids felt with not only the history of the community, but actually with the community. And I think that was one of the real poignant pieces, was not only have an understanding of the story itself, but also relating that story to somebody you actually know that you've just spent some time with. They were docents in the museum. Reed was docent in the museum and could help us with the people that he knew. Kay docented, many docented. Hisa came and told stories with us too. So they get to know those kids the kids get to know the survivors in some sense, and really feel like they have a better understanding of the story. To the latter point of how to make it that enduring legacy, I think fortunately we've had a pretty rich program at the museum, and we're not sure where that's headed, but I think that's one piece that can really help. There's also a lot of, or a variety of multimedia pieces, such as the video that we started with today, but also Lucy Ostrander in that work that she's done. She's got a number of really powerful videos that bring the story to life. And so surrounding that multimedia, we've actually created a number of exercises for kids to do, and those are ongoing. I'm a retired teacher, but I have left those in the hands of the fourth grade teachers at this point, and continue to look for opportunities to help them bring that story to life. And so I'm not giving up on it. I'm not saying it's where I want it to be yet, but I certainly have hope for the future there.
If I can just add to that as an educator myself, I think what I realized early on, I think many of us as educators who embrace this subject of study recognize is that what makes our island in so many ways so unique is that we're not talking about this historical period in absentia of the living history in which it still is happening. And to be able to live on an island where you can literally walk in places where the people who experienced this awful experience during World War II walked and lived, and we can be at the Suyamatsu farm and stand on the driveway where the army truck came and picked up the Suyamatsu family at 9 o'clock in the morning on March 30th and talk about that. It really allows greater authenticity in not only having the experience, but being able to tend to it. And Maxine Green, a well-known educator, once said that, you know, we who have not been in the actual shoes of the people that we're teaching about can never know what it was actually like to experience what they experienced, but we can still find a way to tend to the stories. And I think the tending to the stories is what's most powerful. And I see Shannon is joining us. And I remember when Snowfalling on Cedars was being organized as a play, and we had the privilege of working with the cast and bringing them to Suyamatsu Farm, to the museum, to allow all of the cast members to be able to walk in the shoes, so to speak, even though it was, you know, meant to be a fictional story. It had a whole nonfiction real side to it, to literally walk in the shoes of Bainbridge Island Japanese American community members in order to really enhance their roles and how they were able to portray that. And so I think that the idea of enriching and enhancing by having all these lived experiences, these survivors who are willing, I don't know any school district or any island community, any community like ours in the United States as an educator who could teach about a subject like this and have almost as many survivors show up as guest speakers as there are students in the class. People who are willing to drive over from Seattle, take time off from their busy schedules to be able to share their stories with young people. And so it's almost like we have these magical like conditions on the island that allow the stars to all line up to really bring these stories to life in a way that unfortunately other communities can't, but we have the ability to because of the island's unique history with the story, but also because these places are still around between the memorial, Suyamatsu Farm, Bainbridge Gardens, Town and Country, the museum. You know, it really is quite a dynamic and experience. And then to be able to have the connection to Manzanar, Minidoka, et cetera. And so I think that adds a lot to a teacher's ability to bring a story to life. It's not just the living experience, but all the documentaries that have been done. You know, you can now find the entire Bainbridge Review from 1940 to 1946 digitized on the Kitsap, library site. And so all the work that the Bainbridge Review had done puts us in a very educationally privileged place to be able to teach about this subject. And because it's literally in the soil and in the bones, you know, of the people who are on the island.
Can I just?
Yes, go ahead, Bill.
Well, I think just to piggyback on that, I mean, so the bearing witness, you know, that title, I think that just, it tells us so much, and a hope for the future again is that this model of ways to present curriculum for teachers, this model of talking to people, and in this case it's this story, but it might go further, you know, in the future with other stories. But the key there being bearing witness to those stories. I mean, when you hear when these fourth graders heard Lilly say that, you know, this was her first train ride ever, you know. And that was just like mind blowing for them. And I think they gained greater appreciation for that challenge that she was going through. Or Jon tells the story when we're at Suyamatsu Farm about Akio Suyamatsu would actually, he'd be up farming the strawberry farms where Wilkes School is presently, and Akio would tell the horses to go home, and then he would walk down later, and they know how far the farm is from the school, and they were like, well, you just sent the horses on their own?
At 10 years old.
Yeah, 10 years old, exactly. And it's those just hearing those stories has such a powerful impact on kids that they're not going to get from reading the story, they're going to get from hearing the story. So that whole notion of bearing witness is really what brings that authenticity to it. I think that's a crucial piece, and just a model, I hope, continues.
Yeah, and I appreciate that so much. And for some reason, what flashed in my mind was Vern Nakata being teary-eyed at Manzanar and recognizing that, he had never met his grandfather. And so there he touched a stone that his grandfather touched. And so it can also be, and now Vern's story is, we bear witness to him, and he has children. And so it's that carrying through the generations that can happen too. It's just really, really, really special, really. And so we're about 10 minutes after, and about 5 minutes to wrap up. So I want to thank all of the wonderful people who participated today. I have a lot of folks that are excited that this is recorded because they are wanting to watch it later. And I just want to ask, a last question, which is there anything that you had hoped we would touch on that we didn't cover that you'd like to mention before we wrap up? And I think maybe any of you can pop in and just let me know if there was something that you were hoping that we would cover that we haven't been able to.
Well, I just want to say that the experience of going to Manzanar was really exceptional, and I want to thank Katy and Jon for organizing this.
Goes both ways.
Absolutely. Lilly, do you have anything?
I think it turned out to be all that you covered almost everything, and so it's great. Thank you.
Really, and it's really remarkable that Bainbridge school districts have incorporated this in their curriculum. I just really marvel at that, and I think a lot of it has to do with you two.
Thank you, Frances. And I love that Reed pointed out that it was kind of like being so adamant that we want to make sure, that it's in our curriculum, did open a path. And so now, not only do we have these stories in our curriculum, but we do have the stories of the Indopino community on the island. Yeah. Thanks to the curriculum being adopted by the school board that Honor Thy Mother with Gina Corpus had made. And so I think, it takes a long time. I mean, Jon started this in 2007, 2008, and the perseverance is, and then, Alisa's been working on it for 20 years, so it really does take a whole bunch of folks that are committed with their hearts and souls. And I definitely am so moved and feel so honored, and feel like it's almost, it's interesting. It's almost, it's literally like family. It's like creating family. And it helps me, you know, walk on this Squamish land that we're on and feel generations and feel appreciations and feel honored to be connected to all of you.
It really took an entire community and national community. And Alisa, you talk about family, you know, being able to have these relationships around the country because of this. I just feel very grateful and very blessed for everyone who's been involved with this over the years.
Okay. Yeah.
I was just gonna give a shout out. Well, first of all, love all of you, even the ones I don't know. But I was going to give a shout out to Minidoka. They now have a visitor center. I personally haven't seen it yet, but there's been a bunch of work done there. They do have an annual pilgrimage, which is usually June. So, you know, that's Bainbridge Island went to 3 sites, or came from and went to sites that are in the National Park Service today, which is from the memorial to Manzanar, and then all but 5 families went to Minidoka. And of the families who stayed behind, Matsu and Victor, who were on those trips, stayed in Manzanar the whole time. So if you have a chance to get out to Twin Falls, Idaho, or to attend the Minidoka pilgrimage, I encourage you to.
I also just want to remember the elders and survivors, the incredible people who were part of this journey since 2011, who are no longer with us, and all the contributions that they made, and the sadness of their passing, you know, and also the blessing of having so many people that are still with us. That is such a deep place in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.